Well, good morning. So I wanted to jump on here and we'll do the live event. I did have some technical difficulties. I picked up some kind of bug on the other computer and still can't get it working as I'm in my other studio or the other camera right now or the other computer. But we're going to talk about the 7 step. I want to jump in pretty quickly because if there's anybody that's wanting to come online and make sure there's time to do that. Now, why am I doing this? I'm going live every day to talk about to introduce the 7 step reset process to help people with anxiety. And the reason is because there's so much concern right now out there with the uncertainty, the volatility, things aren't, people aren't sure. In the US, we've got layoffs going on, people out of work, people having to work without pay because the government is shut down over a month now. And all of this creates this anxiety. And if you ever watch someone who's distracted, you know they can't be at the best when they're distracted. And also, we can't be at our best when we are in our protective mode. And we go into protective mode to avoid, or when fight or flight is appears imminent. Now, what does that mean? When when we first imagine a threat or see a threat, we start getting concerned. The cortisol starts to come in, the norepinephrine, and preparing for the adrenaline. And in that process, we start shutting down other functions because we're ready to fight this proverbial tiger. Well, in our lives right now, we don't typically see tigers, right? I mean, how many people have had a life or death threat, real threat, in the last 5 years? I mean, something that was truly life or death that they were facing and had to fight, like as in fighting a tiger. So it may happen to a few, but it's not something that happens regularly. Certainly not multiple times a day, which is when we can go into protective mode. And so I wanted to take my seven step transformation process and apply it to anxiety because it's the same. We're still working with the same thing. So this is not mental health at all. Think of it more like high performance in sports or mental toughness in sports. I'm going to do this every weekday. The same 7 steps. We'll do it in November at 8 o'clock. And my intention is December to move it to 7:30, but I'll keep you posted. Today I had to start a little bit late because I had some difficulties with the other computer, so I'm still not working right. I've got to figure out what's going on. I think maybe it picked up some kind of virus, but I'll figure it out. I have to probably start over with it going into the safe mode. So anxiety is not only manageable, but you don't really have to tolerate it. If you There's a couple of things. One is that we tend to put a lot into anxiety. We have regrets of the past, we have concerns of the future, and those go into anxiety. But because we don't do a good job of separating it out, and because neurons that fire together wire together, a lot of things can go into this idea of anxiety. So, what we want to do is use the 7 step process to break it out a little bit so you can see what's really going on. And then you realize that anxiety is really just about getting your attention. As a matter of fact, excitement and anxiety have a very similar signature. And so it's easy for us to be excited about something and then start wondering, why am I anxious? Why do I have this concern? And then we start looking for something to be anxious about. And sure enough, we find it. Now, people may feel like they've tried everything. And that's ideally who I like working with, because once they see and accept that there is something else out there, they're more open. When people think that they have all the solutions and they just haven't applied them yet, it's a little bit harder for them to look at something that's not quote unquote traditional in their mind. What I'm going to talk about is extremely traditional, extremely mainstream. It's just that the brain scanning tools of the last few decades have made it possible for us to see what's actually going on in the brain. So we don't use the same language that we did. But if you go back and look at back centuries, what was said about the quote unquote subconscious, that's the network of neurons, and everything applies. So they had it right. It's just that they didn't know that it wasn't a mind, it was a network of neurons. So the 7 step reset is aligned with neuroscience. I work hard not to use the terminology from neuroscience because I think that helps to confuse things. There's two distinctions that I like you to make. One is, think of it as learning to drive the car We're not going to talk about how the transmission works, how throttle bodies and fuel injectors and turbos, and we're not going to worry about any of that. We're just going to work on driving the car because you don't need that. The same way you get in a car, start it, drive off, turn, unwind the turn, stop, and get ready again. That's what we're doing. We're going to do it at that level. Now, we can always go deeper into the neuroscience, but that's out of scope for this. The other thing is, even today, while we're going through it, I'd like you to start making a distinction between the signals coming from the real mind and signals coming from the network of neurons. The network of neurons, it's a lot easy. They're a lot faster and quicker. So it happens faster, but it also comes online quicker because the reaction time is less. And then the other way to tell is if it's repeated. So if you have self-talk that tends to repeat, that's another good way of determining that, okay, this is from the network of neurons. All right, now, the foundation of this is that our foundational concept is that we make 33,000 decisions a day. Every day we're making 33,000 decisions. We're awake about 65,000 seconds. So with that being awake 65,000 seconds, you can assume that that's a decision every other day, every other second. But it's more than that, because if you look at microstimulus response cycles, you'll have multiple of those every second. So we're looking at well over 100,000 stimulus response cycles in most of our days. It's important because each response, each time one of those cycles is completed, it's priming us to get ready for the next one. This is why you can get into that anxiety spiral, which is one of the reasons I'm doing this. We don't have to fear that anxiety spiral. Once you understand the makeup of it, you also can understand that, okay, you don't have to accept it. So those 33,000 decisions per day. Let me go to this other screen. If you think about the 33,000 decisions per day, that's like you have the first one, then you have the second one, then you have the third one, and you have the fourth one. And by the end of the day, you have 33,000 of them. And you can see that if you don't get a handle on it early, it's very easy for that to get away from you. If you've ever been in a situation where you had some kind of an emergency happen, hold on a second, I'm trying to get this a little clearer, where you had some kind of an emergency happen, and 15 minutes later, 30 minutes later, you still feel, hold on. You still feel the chemical event, right? So when we get stressed out like that, it's not a mental event, it's a chemical event. It's a chemical event and it's a neurobiological event. What do I mean by that? So the event is happening in the network of neurons. And what's going through the network of neurons is energy, an impulse. And that energy has the same signature as thought, because it has the same signature as thought. The base level of thought is energy. And since energy is going through the network of neurons, it's very easy for us to confuse the two. So it's important. That's why I said one of the things we're going to have you do is start understanding when something's coming from the network of neurons versus when it's coming from the conscious mind, because you want to be able to separate that thought, because consciousness is the present moment, and you want the present moment to be clear of thought. The chatter from the network of neurons or the subconscious is quiet, and we have a clear mind. And if you don't understand the difference between the mind versus signals from thoughts from the mind versus signals from the network of neurons, it's easy to get this chatter, and you can't control it because you're trying to control it by quieting your mind, but it's not the mind, it's you're firing off associations. I don't want to get more complicated than that. I went further than I wanted to go. So what we're going to do here is we have our steps. We have our steps. 1, 2, 3 is a big one. 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, I'm going to focus today on step 2. And this whole thing, this whole process is what I'll call a stimulus response cycle. Now, I'll use the term cycle I'll use the term response and reaction, and they're different things. So too often we let our reaction become our response. And when you see somebody's being triggered, you can see that happening in real time. Or if you're having a debate with somebody, or and they're not answering, you're asking them a question, and they're triggered. They're off to something else. They can't answer your question, and they're just coming at you. They're attacking you. Maybe what they're attacking you with is not rational. It's not relevant. And so this is that idea of the reaction happening and it becoming their response. The reason I want to spend time on step 2 today is because step 2 is one of the things that you can do. Again, I'm in my different studio today, so it's a little bit trickier. Take off the autofocus. There you go. It's something that you can actually start doing right away, and it's more familiar to you. So let's jump in. Step 1, you have your beliefs, you have your neuroplasticity, you have your priming, you have your mindset, and you have your physiology. And all of these are important, and all of these impact the other. My beliefs can impact my habits, and then I use neuroplasticity because it's more about the dynamics of being in command of your neuroplasticity. So the habits are what you want them to be rather than what was conditioned when you were 0 to 7. And then the priming, we're either being primed externally or we're priming ourselves, or being aware that we're being primed. So all your advertising, marketing, that's going after your priming. And priming can happen days in advance. You can be primed into a certain mindset days in advance. And then we have the mindset. And part of that mindset is the awareness. So we'll talk about that in step 2, being aware of where your mindset is. You have to be aware when you shift from a growth mindset into a fixed mindset. And then step 2 is our state of being. And I'm going to say the state and where are we with our self-image. So now when we talk about state, let's see if I can clean that up a little bit. As good as it gets, right? When we talk about state, it's mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. And the spiritual one, it's our own higher self. It's not the spiritual realm, it's our higher self. So if you think about it, it's our higher self that will be interacting with the spiritual realm. But this is awareness of awareness. So we have to be aware. When I say awareness of awareness, like right now, you're aware that you are in this, you're hearing me talk about awareness, and you're aware that I'm talking about awareness. So we can have levels, right? We're aware that we are aware. And sometimes you may find yourself, let's say you say you're going to stop scrolling on social media, you're going to put your phone away at 9 p.m. Just making that up. And at 9 p.m. you're still on your phone, and you're aware that you're on your phone. You're aware that you said you're not going to be on your phone after 9 o'clock, and you're aware that you're still on your phone. You're aware that you're ignoring what you intended to do. That's what I mean by awareness of awareness. And what we have to start doing is not letting that just ride. We have to look at that as we have to listen to that and understand that you're making a conscious decision to not do what you said you were going to do. And if you make enough of those conscious decisions, the outcome you wanted won't happen. So this awareness is important. It's not, I mean, and it's the what I mean by the spiritual awareness of awareness. And then we have the physiology, the physical. What is your physical state? Are you stressed out already? Are you hyper? We can start looking at things like heart rate variability here. We can start looking at things like your energy levels. So we know that willpower wanes during the day, right? And willpower wanes with decision making. Well, if you look at what's actually waning, your heart rate variability, there's a consistency between the heart rate variability and the willpower. And so being aware of what your energy level feels like, you can also know, okay, I'm not going to be relying on willpower a lot because I'm already drained. So this is an important area. And on the self-image one, we want to pay attention to our self-talk. Are we already using defeated self-talk? Are we degrading ourselves? Are we setting ourselves up to lose? So for example, one of the things that's really big now especially with artificial intelligence and the speed of that things are coming, and remember, if you think about Moore's law and the technology that was doubling every 18 months, that's since 1970. So we're on the very steep part of that curve. As that curve goes up, very steep. So it's exponential. The VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, it's not going away. It's going to be that way. So we can't wait until we have perfection. If you're over 50 years old, you were rewarded for being right. Now, I hate to say it, but people are rewarded for speed, but you don't want just to have speed. You want to have speed that's based on good judgment. And one of those is to do shorter sets. So like I talk about a short-term fix, prototypes, proof of concept. You want to do these and use a lot of trial and error before you go big. And that trial and error means that you have to accept not getting it right. I remember mentoring. My thing was I would find A students and mentor them so that they could compete, because what we found is that a lot of your, well, let me back up. So if you look, I looked at a study, and this study said that it classified successful people as being promoted ahead of their peers, and effective people who were able to get results. And what it showed was that the successful people promoted ahead of their peers did more networking. They built the relationships. They spent more time getting into the right position. They focused on getting off of projects before the project crashed. And the effective leaders, they were focused on getting results. And what I found was that as I started looking at this when I started looking at this as and mentoring people, what I saw was that a lot of your A students did not have that networking. They were not good at the networking. And I'll call it C students, but we'll call it this other group of people were very good at not only the networking, but they were good at talking a good game. They could talk such a good game and it's not backed up. Whereas, so they're saying with certainty when it's 70%, whereas your A students would need to get to 90% before they could have certainty. So I didn't want to change that, but what I wanted to give them was the ability to to express and to build the relationships and to create some confidence. So one of the things I focused on was getting them to have a point of view, because that was a weak link. I noticed that they didn't have a good ability to express a point of view. And it's probably because in order to get an A, you have to give the professor back what they're looking for. If you give the professor a very good answer, but it's not aligned with what they're looking for, you're probably not going to get that A. And so that point of view, having the point of view is a very, very important part of it. Now, so again, when we get into the self-image, you've got to be in such a place where you're confident. And that's what I was talking about, the trial and error. So you're not going to be wrong. It's just that that's one thing that didn't work. And then you do trial and error again, you do trial and error again, and then you start testing. And you have to be able to keep a growth mindset during all of that, because trial and error, the first couple of times, it may not work. So that's step 2. And then we have step 3. Step 3 is the conditioned reaction part of it. This is the conditioning. So all that conditioning happened from 0 to 7, was tweaked during your teen years, and then solidified and turned into your model of the world in your 20s with the prefrontal cortex. That conditioning is what's running our lives, because 95% of what we do is by habit. And many of those habits are habits that existed when we were 0 to 7. And that's why I call this the stimulus, or the conditioned reaction steps. This is conditioned reaction. These are conditioned. And too often those reactions are a survival reaction. So if you're having survival reactions for normal kind of things, you can see where people get triggered. You can see where people run into anxiety. You can see where people appear like they're out of control, because they're having a survival reaction. And a survival reaction is consistent with what we would be doing if there was a Serengeti tiger. So we want to make sure that the reaction does not equal the response. And for those of you who just joined, the step 1 is we look at your beliefs, your neuroplasticity, your habits, and your command of that, your priming, mindset, and then your physiology. We don't want to have a defeated physiology. You have to get that corrected, because it impacts over here. If you are already defeated, feeling defeated, your self-talk is defeated, by the time you get to this condition step, you've already lost, because you're more easily triggerable. You're going to go into fight or flight more easily. And then we have step 5 is emotional modulation. Now, typically when we get to reaction, the reaction equals the response, and the response equals the action. And that's step 6 is the action. So if your reaction equals your response, and your response equals your action, it's not going to be long before you get yourself into some trouble, right? And what I mean by that, relationships, we see relationships break down. I like to say that trust is built on the escalator going up, but it's often lost like jumping out the window on the way down. And so we need to have this space in here. And you've heard people say you have to pause. The pause is very difficult, because once you react, you're already in that habitual mode. And the pause, if it's something that is a threat, the pause is not possible, because you're already, like I said, neurons fire together, wire together. The neurons are already off and running. Your associations are already running, and they've overrun that pause. And that's because in step 3, that conditioned reaction is 11 million, can process at 11 million bits per second. So we figure that's about a quarter of a second. So roughly 2 million, a little over 2 million bits of information can be processed in that small space. The conscious mind can only process at 50 bits per second. So that 50 bits per second, there's no way it's going to be able to get a handle on this, because by the time you feel one or understand one thing that's coming from it, the more association, the associations keep rolling. So we have 100 billion neurons, and each one is connected to 1,000 to 10,000 other neurons. So in other words, we have trillions of connections and associations, and that's what's happening in here. So that's why we have emotional modulation. So all of this is happening over 30,000 times a day, like every other second. And if you are just going with it, we're on autopilot, making more of our yesterdays over and over and over. So we want to have a step in here, emotional modulation. Now, this can take 0 to 90 seconds. You may not need it at all. But if you're in a set situation where you're feeling like you might be triggered, that's where you have to go into emotional modulation. Emotion is energy in motion. So as it comes in, we want to just let it flow through. We don't want to dwell on it. We don't want to suppress it. If you suppress it, all you do is make it grow, because it's energy, right? And by suppressing it, the emotion is a signal trying to tell you something. That signal gets louder and louder and louder. Now, after 90 seconds, it's now a feeling. Once it's a feeling, it's a neurochemical event, and it's stored in your neurons. This is why you can feel emotions in different parts of your body. So we want to let that pass through. So if the bad news comes and you feel that emotion coming on, that's where we do this step 5, where you do the emotional modulation. And there's, like I said, there's levers. There's dozens of levers on each of these. We can talk about how to do that, but it's out of scope for 25, 35-minute conversation. And then step 6 is action. So I have that here. Step 6 is your action. And the action is do it, delay it, delegate it, dump it, or discard it. And if you need to do the emotional modulation, that would be a good example of what you want to do is delay it. So rather than having the meeting with the person right there, you just say, hey, look, let's take this offline. We'll convene in 30 minutes and go through it. That'll give you a chance to reset your emotions. If you don't do the emotional modulation, you run the risk of having your day with that feeling all day long. It's the same way where, you're driving and the police car pulls up behind you and the lights flash and they go by you for somebody else, but your heart is already racing, the cortisol's already there, and that emotion, that feeling, even though it wasn't about you at all, completely unrelated to you, that feeling can sit with you for hours, and you're constantly trying to get back on track. So that's why we do the emotional modulation. It's a process of letting it flow through. The short version is you want to locate the emotion. Where is it? You want to label it, and then you want to learn from it because it's a signal. And you want to do that in 90 seconds. And all your emotions, they can be the negative ones, the ones that create anxiety, can be distilled down to 8. Sadness, shame, vulnerability, embarrassment, anger, frustration, helplessness, and disappointment. So you want to label it with one of those and then learn from it. And labeling it is important because those 8 emotions can all be rolled up to be presumed to be anxiety, but you would do something very different if you're angry versus sad, or if you're vulnerable versus disappointed or frustrated. There's different steps that you would do. So labeling it is important, and that automatically starts to remove the anxiety. And then 7 is mindfulness. So 7 is mindfulness. So we had emotional modulation is step 5. Emotional modulation is step 5. That keeps our response from equaling our action. We're going to condition in this pause. This actually has to be conditioned. You have to reset the conditioning here. We do a positivity exercise, and we also can do some other patterns to make it at the conditioning level, because this is happening within a quarter of a second, and then the conscious mind doesn't come on for another quarter of a second. So that's a half second. And what happens is it's fast to do it mentally with the conscious mind. So we condition in the shift here at step 3 at the stimulus reaction, because we're getting this happening 33,000 times a day, right? So if 33,000 times a day you're running through this, once it starts going, it's done. You're done. It's just going to keep going. And then mindfulness, because we're getting ready. So this is like mindfulness over here, and then we come back and we go through it again. Mindfulness, we come back and we go through it again. So this mindfulness gets us set back again, and you're not going to change your beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming. You can look at your priming, mindset we want to look at, physiology, but this is really set. This, when you start your day, this is what it is. But by being aware, if you're aware that your mindset slipped, you can catch it. If you're aware that your physiology slipped, you can catch it. If you're aware that you're being primed, you can catch it. So that's it. I'm going to leave it here. Let me see if there's anybody who wants to come online so we can actually do some interaction. Otherwise, I'll say if you joined late, you can go and watch the event from Friday. It's still out on the same platform where you're watching this. And that one I go into more depth. But let's see if there's anybody who wants to come online. We can do that and then have a conversation. I'll have to pull up my chat. And also, I'll put in where you can get more information. So you can go to www.7step/live. Still building this page out. I started these live events last week, and still building out the landing page, but it's up and running. So you can find that, and I'll put on the updated schedule. So I'll be going live every weekday at 8 a.m. covering the same thing, but I do it differently. I talk about it differently. I'll start using infographics to actually show it being applied. And then if there's anybody who wants to come on the screen, you can use this link here. And that way we can have a conversation about it. Other than that, like I said, you can Friday event on the platform where you're watching this. And actually, if you're in Dynamic Leadership Center, go to Transformation After 50, Facebook page, Transformation After 50. Same if you're watching on YouTube, you can go to Transformation After 50 to find it there. All right, we'll see you tomorrow, or if you want, send people here because we're going to talk about the same thing, but I'll go into it with a different approach. Like today, I focused on step 2. Tomorrow, I'll probably focus on step 3 a little bit more, and I'll also give an example using an infographic.